Welcome to the IDPro show, your source for all the identity stuff you want to know about being in the identity profession. We are live at Identiverse 2024 in Las Vegas. I'm Heather Flanagan, Executive Director of IDPro.
I'm Chris Cochran of AKA Identity, and we have a very special guest today. We have Omri Gazitte. He is the CEO and co-founder of Aserto. Welcome to the show, Omri.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We got to get right to it. There's one question that seems to plague technicians all around the world, and that's the difference between authentication and authorization. So I tend to look at it from this perspective. I tend to look at, imagine if you were walking up to a gate, a guarded gate, and you had your ID card, and you say, hey, this is who I am. I'm authenticating who I am to this guard's person, right? That's authentication. And then authorization is like, hey, if you are matched to an ID that has the authorization to come in, I'm gonna let you pass the gate. But if you don't have authorization, you cannot pass. Sure, you can authenticate, but that doesn't mean you can come in. Would you say that that's a good way to look at the difference between the two?
Yeah. It's funny how often I still have to answer this question. I like to say authentication, prove to me that you are who you say you are. You know, you could do that with anything that we agree on, like a password or a biometric, anything, any secret that we can exchange that, you know, basically proves that you are who you say you are. And then authorization is, now that you pass that first check, what can you do? Like, what permissions do you have? So for example, when you check into a hotel, you have to show your ID and they give you a key card. What does that key card give you? It gives you some access rights to your room. If you're an admin, you have access rights to maybe every room. My card basically gives me access to the gym, but, you know, certainly not to other restricted places in the hotel. I think Heather's card actually gives her access to various rooms, like little rooms within, like the, kind of the IDPro room and things like that. So those are all different types of access, and, authorizations of the process of determining that the person actually is active.
Love it.
Sure, and I agree with all that. It drives me crazy when people follow the anti-pattern of, well, you logged in, so of course you have access. But as you pointed out, you've been asked that question a lot for a long time. So that shifts us to, okay, well, why has things changed that authorization is now actually having a moment? Have enough people actually heard that, no, it's two separate things and you now need to focus on authorization? What's shifted in the landscape?
Yeah, I think it's not like we haven't had standards and innovation in this space. We've had it for 20 years. So XACML, which is one of the oldest version of an OASIS spec for authorization, dates back to basically SAML. SAML took off and XACML did not. And, we've asked ourselves that question many times. I think there are a few things that are different now. The first thing is that people just kind of more or less just put up with the fact that they're going to have to grant roles that are over-provisioned to people. And now as we start kind of shifting the burden of security from the perimeter to the applications themselves, all this, kind of zero trust, although I hate that term because like over-provisioned. You end up like needing to get to like lower privileges, zero standing privileges, the principle of least privilege. A lot of people call it different things, but the bottom line is I want to be able to, kind of reduce all of these entitlements to the smallest set possible. And that in turn brings a kind of a new generation of how to do authorization. And at the same time, we've had, new innovations, like we finally had, XACML is a spec that has a lot of angle brackets, and my team was involved in helping create it. So I could say, because it's, we have some level of ownership in it, like it's a spec that only a mother could love, really.
Right.
It's really hard to get through. Developers just like roll their eyes, right? Too many angle brackets. We finally now have things that are a little bit more approachable by developers, like Open Policy Agent is a much more kind of friendly syntax, still a little hard to get into. And then finally, a lot of vendors like Google and Netflix and Intuit and Carta and Uber and Airbnb, they all started writing about how they built their authorization system. And that created this renaissance in authorization. All of a sudden, you now see all of these startups that are trying to replicate some of these patterns and democratize authorization for developers. So I would say all these forces are kind of coming together to make authorization have its moment, as we said.
So we talked a little bit about what's going on right now, but in these member spotlights, we love to talk a little bit about the origin story. How did you become the identity superhero that you are today? So what is that journey? And was there a moment in your career where you were like, this is what I want to do to change the community?
Wow, yeah. So I got into it just like, I guess, most people by accident. I was more of a distributed systems guy. I was at Microsoft and I was just super fortunate to join right at the time that we were starting the .NET platform. So I got to be one of the co-founders of that. And I got myself involved with data and XML. And XML, angle brackets, it was a thing. At that point, everybody thought that it was going to be kind of the next generation of internet protocols were going to be built with XML. And so we got to do things like SOAP. And that led us to the WS star, or, sometimes known as WS star. That was a way not to do protocols. That was my fault, unfortunately. Like we had a way of building these things, but that led us to security and then federation. And federation was just fascinating. I would say it was the only real, or maybe the most real application of the SOAP stack. And it tried to solve a real problem. And the real problem was, how do you, kind of essentially do federated identity? And, I would say there are perhaps still implementations, but mostly is known for the ideas that helped inspire things like OAuth 2 and eventually OpenID. So I got into it like when my team was doing WS Federation, and I kind of, I continued along that path when we started Azure. My team did this thing called the Azure Access Control Service, which was a security token service. It was a little bit ahead of its time, and because we were like, okay, well, we could do access control, but we haven't done identity yet. So maybe we should start doing Azure Active Directory first. So we mostly kind of focused on that. And then when I left Microsoft, I mostly kind of left the identity space. But in 2020, when I was looking at the next thing to do, my co-founder were looking at what was still hard to do. And we said, well, access control, authorization, that's still an unsolved problem. Why don't we get back to that? And so that's kind of how I ended up back in the community.
Love it.
We don't let people out of it. Once you're in identity, it's very, very sticky. But what you did was you went ahead and formed a company. Why did you form Aserto as opposed to trying to find a home within another organization and make them do the work of changing their products? Why did you want to create something new?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I have done so Aserto is my third startup. I was fortunate enough to start my career just running into somebody who was founding a company. This was back in the very early 90s, before we even used the word startup.
Right.
So he hired me as his first engineer, and I really enjoyed that. But I felt like I had, kind of, a pretty large impact, but, very small scope. And when I had the opportunity to join Microsoft, I felt like that was a completely different experience. And I, very much enjoyed my time there. But at the end of the day, it's a very large company, right, where you can have a large impact. But, even if you're growing within that company, you're just a cog in the machine, right? Like I joined in 1998. And we all like to think that some of the work that we did there, like .NET and all these other things, like had some impact. But that thing was like a rocket. And, we could have all taken off 10 years and it would have still grown largely the way that it grew. And kind of like when I recognized that, like it takes some level of humility to recognize the fact that you're not really kind of able to measure impact. I went back to do my own startup. That didn't go so well. And, so I've bounced back between, large companies, medium-sized companies. And I really had a feeling that I wanted to do my own thing again. And so I was fortunate enough to join forces with George Draper's, my co-founder, who I've worked with. This is our fourth rodeo together. So, the framing was, let's actually go try to change the world. Let's go do something that, really only are kind of like you need the agility of a startup to do. And we wanted to do something in the developer space because that's what we know. And we felt like we had enough domain expertise in identity and access that, and there's still like a lot of white space, a lot of unsolved problems here, that's where we wanted to focus. So I would say that, kind of the framing for us was, we wanted to go do this as kind of our next career experience. And, we wanted to pick the coolest, hardest problem that we would find.
Yeah, I love it. Identity seems like it's the new hotness right now. It's having like its ascension in the community, because before, identity was a part of IT. It was part of someone's job, even for the same for security. But now you have practitioners that are solely focused on identity, and maybe even a subject within identity. What do you think is pushing the evolution of identity today, and why is it becoming so popular from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. One is security itself. So identity has always been kind of this weird thing, right? Because is it security? Yeah, maybe it's part of security. Right. Is it like part of the, kind of, engineering, like the, kind of the, that discipline? Yes, it is. There's, kind of it's tweenered between a few different things. And I think that we've actually been able to create enough, of a kind of like a convergence, for example, single sign-on is something where things are so automated at this point. Like when I create a new application, a new SaaS app, I have to be standards compliant. And if I'm if I am a vendor that's trying to offer single sign-on for all of my employees, I will buy one of these solutions. And so all of a sudden now we have people who don't have to be like, kind of deep engineers to, practice, to have a career in identity. And there are all these related fields like governance and compliance that like work hand in hand with identity. So I think back to the day, I'm kind of an old guy. So back in really like a long time ago, like if you were a database person, that meant like that you built a database.
Right.
And then, like you started seeing SQL and all these things, kind of like democratize the technology, and you could be a database administrator, or you could be an analyst and write SQL queries. You didn't actually have to like know how the database was built to go use it. And I think we're in the same place with identity, where it's now a core piece of infrastructure that every organization must have. And so there's all of these roles around it. There's administering it. There is, kind of writing applications to it. There is, kind of being able to process all of the data exhaust that comes out of it. Like all these things are roles. Mm-hmm.
Andy Hindle in the opening keynote for Identiverse had a great Venn diagram. We love our Venn diagram. But what I appreciated about it was the new one is you have your experience, which is its thing. You've got security, which overlaps, and you've got privacy, which overlaps that. And what was different about this Venn diagram from like previous iterations was the superset around all of them was identity, because there isn't an aspect of the business, the organization, the whatever it is you're doing that identity ultimately doesn't touch.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think identity is in some ways swallowing security, right? It used to be the other way around. You saw identity as kind of like this, kind of small, kind of in the Venn diagram, it was just like a bubble inside of security. I think identity is now becoming the centerpiece. And all the security approaches are starting to become a lot more identity-based, because we're no longer, kind of able to go do things at network levels, for example, because we're all logging in from Starbucks into our applications. And so everything has to revolve then around identity and devices, as opposed to, something that, some parameter that, security parameter that we can enforce. So
I do think we have some work to do, though. A few years ago, I was at a different conference chatting with someone who I hadn't seen in a while. He had come out of the network space, high-performance computing networking. His name was Andrew. And I said, Andrew, I haven't seen you. What happened? He's like, yeah, man, I mean, that identity stuff was too hard. I want to just make bits go fast, so I'm back in networking. And you know what? I don't think that's actually changed a whole lot. Identity is so difficult that a lot of these other disciplines, do we touch on all of them? Yes. Do they want us to? Not really, because it's just too hard. I think we've got a lot of room for improvement to make life easier.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, you know, you look at an organization today and it seems like the larger the organization gets, it exponentially gets more complicated, right? Because you're dealing with mergers and acquisitions, you're looking at multiple IDPs, you're looking at multiple Entra instances if you're having different groups. And it seems like things are just going to get more complicated. And so I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you know, there were companies that would come into data centers and, you know, all the cable management stuff, and you'd see this tangled mess, and they would come in and everything would be perfectly manicured, and it just looks gorgeous. It seems like that's kind of what we'll need for identity in the future, because everything's just going to get more complicated. What do you think about the complexities of the identity environment in an enterprise today?
Yeah, it's crushing. I mean, it's staggering. I love the analogy of like the, you know, crazy cables, because there's no, you know, no business grows in a linear path. You have just a bunch of things that accrete over time. And I think today, if you ask people that run identity systems, can you tell me what, you know, access this particular user has? Or, you know, conversely, can you tell me for this resource, who has access to it? They can't answer those questions. And the tools that we have used to try to manage these answers, things like, you know, LDAP groups and things like that, they're like, we've way outgrown them at this point, right? It used to be, I mean, ironically, back in the, you know, kind of late 90s, early 2000s, we all had LDAP, Active Directory. I, you know, helped kind of build some of that stuff at Microsoft, and yes, sorry. But at least we had one place where all these applications, when they would want to know like what you could do, like what role you had in the application, they would define an LDAP group. And the problem was that we had a lot of them. Like I like to say, when I left Microsoft back in, I think it was, 2011, we had about 100,000 employees and 300,000 groups. So like, how do you even reason about that? Like, what do these groups do? Like, does this one even like mean anything? Is any application using it? Can we like garbage collect it?
Oh, come on. AI is going to solve all that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it only got worse because at least with login and identity and authentication, we were able to kind of consolidate on a set of standards. And now you have a single way of logging in. Imagine if you had 1,000 SaaS applications and everyone had a user ID and a password. Like, you know, offboarding an employee would be completely impossible. At least now we have a shot of doing that. But that's where authorization again comes in. That's why I'm so excited, because we finally have the ability to be able to ask questions like, you know, for this user and this resource type and this permission, what, you know, resources of this resource type does this user have this permission on? And if you consolidate all of that in a single authorization system, you can finally answer those questions. And like the converse question as well, you know, for this resource, are there any users that are still using it? And that's just such a valuable thing to be able to ask. That's the first step to be able to clean the cables, right?
Yep,
because
exactly.
you go, oh yeah, that cable, it looks kind of old. And in fact, it's connecting nothing to nothing.
Exactly, 100%.
I've never seen that happen. All right, I got one more question for you. There's going to be a bunch of folks here at Identiverse. This is like their first time at this conference. They're still feeling a little new, maybe a little unsure of themselves. If you could give some advice to someone that really wants to dive into the authorization space, maybe get involved in the standards that you're talking about, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so one thing that I love about the identity community is that it's really a welcoming community. And as you said, it's also a fairly esoteric space. And you have people who are propeller heads that, you know, speak in tongues. Like they have a lot of acronyms that are really hard to get into. But I've never really kind of run into someone who was kind of snobby or standoffish about it. I always feel like everybody's inviting. And if you just ask the question, what does that mean? Or can you kind of please explain that? They apologize for not being able to communicate effectively. And so, you know, go find the things that you're really interested in. I think, you know, for us, we're obviously into authorization. The OpenID Foundation now has the AuthSend working group. We have a set of calls. You can join the calls. They're open. If you become a member of OpenID and sign the IPR agreement, then you can participate in the calls. And so, yeah, we would love to get more people. And importantly, a lot of us sometimes miss the forest for the trees. And sometimes when people come in with new, fresh perspectives and ask us questions, especially if they're like, you know, how does that connect with this other thing over here? It really gets our gears going. And so you can have a significant impact just asking, you know, questions around how does this actually work? Because sometimes we were kind of so focused on mechanism that we lose track of some of the most important scenarios. And so like having people that have a wide variety of perspectives is really helpful.
Outstanding. We'll drop some of those resources down in the show notes wherever folks are watching this. Omri, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit and chat with us about identity. Thank you so much to AK Identity and IDPro for enabling Heather and I to go on this journey of finding all these incredible folks in identity. And thank you, the viewer, the listener, wherever you're enjoying this. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. And with that, we'll see everyone next time.